Oh, yeah.
Okay. Alright. We have ventured here today into the untamed jungles of New Jersey to find a mythical lost treasure out here. And I don't know, according to the map that I saw earlier, it should be somewhere around here in this jungle, but it is New Jersey, so it could be hard to find. Let's keep looking around for a little bit. It should be somewhere here.
Whoa, dude, found something.
Let me see. Oh my god! It can't be. Wow, that's the rarest Xbox One in existence, I think. Let me see. Wait. Yes, it is! Dude, you have no idea. Like, this is so rare.
It looks like an ordinary Xbox One to me.
Nah, looks can be deceiving, but trust me, this is... Oh, I can't believe it. It's just sitting here in the middle of the woods of New Jersey, and... Oh my god. Alright, we need to get this back before anyone else finds it. This is crazy. Alright, let's get this back to the lab and we'll examine it.
Hey guys, it's Generalkidd here. How's everyone doing today? So, for today's video, I've got one of the rarest official Xbox consoles there is. This may look like a normal Xbox One, but it's actually very special and very different from normal Xbox Ones in a lot of ways. So, a few months ago, I posted a tease on Twitter for this Xbox, and I wanted to see if anyone could guess what this is. Surprisingly, one person did guess it, but I didn't want to reveal it at the time because I didn't want to spoil the surprise. Most people just guessed it was some sort of limited edition Xbox, like the Taco Bell Xbox or the Battlefield Edition Xbox. But obviously, that is not what this console is. This Xbox is an official Xbox, and it is in fact the official Chinese government-approved Xbox One X. It's part of the family of Chinese government-approved Xbox consoles, which includes all the other versions such as the other Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles. This was not an easy console to get either. So, for today's video, we'll be taking a look at the mysteries of this console and what makes it so rare, as well as how difficult it was for me to acquire this in working condition. Also, just to clarify, this is an actual official Xbox from Microsoft. There's a lot of videos out there of YouTubers showing off, an Xbox they bought off AliExpress or Wish.com, which are obvious knockoffs and completely unrelated to an actual Xbox. And that is not what this is. This is not a fake knockoff console. This is a true China-exclusive official Xbox One. Alright, so for some background on this Xbox console, or rather this whole family of Xbox consoles, let's first talk a bit about the history of video game consoles in China. Prior to September 29th, 2014, all game consoles were banned in China. On June 2000, China banned the sale of video game consoles with the limited exception of a couple consoles like the PS2. But even though some consoles were technically allowed, the vast majority of the games, like 99% of them, were still banned. So there was really no point in getting a console if there were no games for it. But China finally lifted that ban in 2014, and on September 29th of that year is when Microsoft launched the first official console in China in decades. Like, the first console in, for a long time in China. And that was the Xbox One. Since then, Microsoft and Sony have consistently released all their consoles in China. However, it wasn't a simple matter of just simply making the Xbox available in China. Physically, these Xboxes are the same as normal consoles from everywhere else around the world. But the software is a bit different and customized for the Chinese market. By law, in China, companies releasing games in China had to partner with some other Chinese company to be able to launch their consoles. Microsoft partnered with the Chinese IPTV company called Best TV or BES TV, while Sony partnered with Shanghai Oriental Pearl Media, and Nintendo partnered with Tencent. So that is why every Xbox has the BES TV logo on the box and on the console serial number. On top of that, due to further government regulations and restrictions, these consoles also had very limited game and app libraries at launch, and arguably to today still. And that still remains an issue at large. And that's because games and apps need to be approved by China's Ministry of Culture, which can take a while sometimes, and that's assuming they even approve it at all, and they don't take any issue at all with the content of the game. Xbox Live, despite being around for a few console generations by that point, also launched in a separate beta state, which remains a beta to this day. However, you do get some really cool benefits with that, such as free Xbox Live Gold for life, but we'll talk about that later. Now, these consoles have changed a lot since launch, but at launch, there were still a lot of restrictions, such as the console reportedly being region locked to just China for both games and Xbox Live. But these restrictions have all been apparently changed or lifted since launch, which we'll also talk about later in this video. What makes these consoles rare is that they're virtually non-existent outside of China. You can't just go on eBay and expect to be able to look up a Chinese Xbox One and then buy it. These consoles are exclusively sold in mainland China. Other countries and regions that speak Chinese, they still have the global versions of the Xbox with no restrictions at all. And no one on Chinese websites like AliExpress or Temu or Wish.com sell these consoles either. Really, the only way to get these consoles if you live outside China is you have to either travel to China yourself to get it in person, or you have to know someone there that can get it for you. But just getting it isn't enough. It's not that simple. It actually won't even work right out of the box either. Alright, so with that in mind, let's get this Xbox One X set up and running. Now, as I just said, this Xbox doesn't work right out of the box, and I'm not referring to the mandatory updates you have to download on every new Xbox. These consoles actually have a mandatory 2-layer activation you have to do before you can use the console and play games on it. The first activation is the BES TV activation, where you need a valid Chinese phone number to be able to get past the initial setup and sign into your account. The person I got this Xbox from was kind enough to do that process for me, but that activation just lets me finish the initial setup and to log into my account. With just this activation, you can buy and download games from the store, but you can't actually play any games yet. That's what the next activation is for. To do this activation, there's a special app on here on the Xbox that you need to use to activate the console. It's called Real Name Verification, and it requires you to enter your Chinese National Identification Number, which is more or less their equivalent of a social security number. This second activation is mandatory for every account that signs into this Xbox, so you can't just activate one account and have other accounts on the Xbox work. They all need to be activated too and verified by the government. So it's not enough to just buy the Xbox. You have to go through a lot of obstacles to be able to actually use it, and you really need to know someone there who's willing to help you with the activation process for this to be practical at all. Otherwise, this console is more or less just a paperweight without someone being able to activate it. Assuming you do get past that whole process, you'll be greeted with this Xbox Live Gold offer when you sign into a new account. For most Xbox users around the world, this offer will be a Game Pass trial offer, but Game Pass isn't actually available in China, so it's still Xbox Live Gold, which is kind of funny because the Xbox Live branding has been retired for the rest of the world and is now called Game Pass Core. But in China, Xbox Live Gold does still exist, and this offer you see here is for a 0 yuan monthly trial of Xbox Live Gold that has no expiration date. So 0 yuan converts to 0 US dollars. And with no expiration date on this trial, that effectively means that anyone that signs their account into this console gets free Xbox Live Gold for life. With this trial, you get all the features of Xbox Live Gold, such as party chats and online gaming. This works for any Xbox Live account as well, no matter what region it originated from. You can see here on my Microsoft account subscriptions, if I log in, you can even see that it shows up as a separate subscription that's free with no expiration. You can see my Game Pass subscription here, and then you can see my Xbox Live subscription here. This free Xbox Live works for any games as well, not just China exclusive games. It honestly sounds like one of those old scams you'd see everywhere that claims you can get Xbox Live Gold for free for consoles, but this time it's actually real. Now, reportedly, this only works as long as you're signed into and playing games on a Chinese Xbox. My Game Pass subscription still has a while to go before it expires, so I can't test this out yet and see whether it works on other Xbox consoles, but it doesn't really matter, and you'll find out why in a little bit. Okay, so now that everything is set up on this Xbox, let's have a look around. The first thing you'll notice is that everything is in Chinese, simplified Chinese to be more exact. That's not surprising, but what is surprising is that it's the only language on this Xbox. Global Xbox consoles have all languages available, including simplified Chinese, but Chinese Xbox consoles only have simplified Chinese and nothing else. Ironically, it still gives you access to the language and region settings menu, even though you have no options to actually change anything around in there. Next up, let's take a look at the Xbox Store and see what's on there. And the answer to that is not much. Even almost 10 years after launch, the store is still pretty empty. It has a very small selection of free games, and even the paid games are far and few in between. If you search by genres, a lot of these entire genres are completely devoid of games, and only some genres actually have games on the Xbox Store. Games aside, there's also very few apps available either. What's crazy is that a lot of essential apps seem to be missing from the store, such as the Blu-ray disc player app, which is required to play Blu-ray movies on the Xbox. That being said, if your account is originally from a different region, you can still access much of your existing library of games and apps, even if they were never officially released in China. Also, even though Game Pass isn't available in China, a lot of Game Pass games do appear to still be available for me to download in my game library, despite me not actually owning them. I would imagine if my Game Pass subscription expires, these games wouldn't be available anymore either. Another interesting thing about the Xbox Store on Chinese consoles is the rating systems they use. There was much debate about this when I released my video about the China version of Halo MCC. I pointed out that the Chinese version of MCC was rated for ages 3 and up. Some people disputed this and said China has no video game rating system and that MCC's rating was most likely a placeholder. Well, the Chinese Xbox Store largely seems to use the IARC rating system for most games. IARC is the International Age Rating Coalition. It's meant to be an international standard for age rating content to simplify the whole system. However, China is not a member of the IARC, but despite that, it seems to use IARC ratings for most of the games on the store. A handful of games, though, are like MCC and uses this unnamed rating system. I don't believe it's a placeholder, though, because other games that use this unknown rating system have different age ratings compared to MCC, so it's definitely not just some generic placeholder given to all games without an IARC rating. I guess you could say the Chinese Xbox One store is also the only Xbox store and maybe the only digital store for consoles and PCs that use a mix of different rating systems. Now then, let's move on to the games themselves. Probably one of the most important aspects of owning an Xbox. A while ago, I did a video about the China exclusive version of Halo MCC, which was a special version without any of the modern updates, so it's like a time capsule of launch MCC. It also had special censorship features built into it, which actually turned out to be pretty hilarious. The main reason people were interested in this game, though, is because it had a separate set of achievements that achievement hunters could get. However, only the digital version of China MCC could be played on non-Chinese consoles. The disc version will be rejected and won't launch on non-China consoles. You need to get someone to sign in on your account on a Chinese Xbox to even be able to buy MCC for you, which then becomes available for you to download on any Xbox. And initially, Chinese Xbox games wouldn't even work on the Xbox Series consoles. Only a Chinese Xbox like this is able to play disc copies of China exclusive games and buy games off the China Xbox store. That's still true to this day. But the cool thing is that Chinese Xbox consoles aren't actually region locked anymore and limited to Chinese Xbox games. Well, the store is, but they're physically not region locked. They can actually play games from any region worldwide, both digital and disc versions of games. So technically, that means Chinese Xbox consoles are the only Xboxes that can play all Xbox games around the world. Whereas the Xbox consoles that most people have can play most games, but not games from China. That's a pretty good deal so far. An Xbox that gives you free Xbox Live for life and can play every Xbox game in existence from every region, that's that's pretty good. Also, speaking of China exclusive games like Halo MCC, even though they're playable on global consoles, some games actually behave a bit differently when played on an actual Chinese Xbox. For example here, China MCC actually has an additional intro screen that doesn't show up on global Xbox consoles. This is what the title screen actually translates to when I ran it through a translator. It's basically a health warning and advisory to not play video games for too long. Why it only shows up on Chinese consoles? I'm not sure, but it seems the game has some awareness of what console it's being run on. Also, when I and a few others did videos of what China MCC is like, we all pointed out that for the most part, China MCC doesn't actually support the Chinese language on the UI and in most games. Even if you change your console's language to simplified Chinese, MCC would always be in English, no matter what. But on a Chinese Xbox, the game not only supports the Chinese language, but its UI changes a bit too, starting with the intro screens and the start screen. The main menu is different too. Aside from the differences in language support, China MCC also doesn't have Halo 3 ODST on the main menu. Not that it actually worked anyways on the global consoles. But the extras menu is also, all they have on this version is just a link to a help screen, which doesn't actually work either. Whereas on the global Xboxes, the extras menu actually has a lot more stuff. Other games have varying levels of differences on the Chinese Xbox too. I'm guessing there's something built into the games that make them aware of the consoles running on, and they'll behave a bit differently depending on that. As for playing regular games from around the world, most games will run just fine without restriction, aside from their default language being in simplified Chinese. I mean, you can see here I have Halo Infinite running just fine, and this is the global version of Halo Infinite. There is no special China version of Infinite as far as I'm aware. And but yeah, it's just the default language is changed to simplified Chinese. Now this could be an issue for some games that don't let you manually change the language, but fortunately games like MCC and Halo Infinite do give you the option to change your language in the menus. So you can play games like these in the language you prefer, but some games you'll be stuck in Chinese. But wait, what about backwards compatible Xbox 360 and OG Xbox games? They're supposed to run on Xbox One consoles now too, but perhaps they might be in a weird place because Xbox 360 and OG Xbox games, they were technically never legally allowed in China during the video game console ban. Well, you might have noticed in my game library earlier that while most of my digitally owned games are there, including Game Pass games, there were no Xbox 360 or OG Xbox games. And I can assure you that I do own several 360 and OG games digitally that are also backwards compatible. So where do they go? Can I even play them? Well, because they're not available in my digital library, nor can I find them on the store, the only way I can test this out is by using disc copies. So let's try Halo 3 for the 360 first and see what happens. So once I insert this disc, the console does recognize it properly, and it even prompts me to download an update. That update is normal though. Any 360 disc game you insert needs to be completely downloaded, and you can't install anything off the disc. So now that I've finished that update, let's launch the game. So the game does actually launch, and it is going through the initial 360 emulator setup as well as all the other stuff, which does take a bit. But after it's done, all that initial setup, the game does load correctly and actually goes in-game. It can even grab all my cloud saves for Halo 3 from the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 UI is also in Chinese too, so it did adapt to the console settings. So Halo 3 for 360 did install and play perfectly when I used the disc. Of course, there's still no way to download this from the store, and even though I do own Halo 3 digitally, I can't play it without the disc, so it doesn't even recognize my digital ownership of 360 games. But at least Xbox 360 games can be played just fine. But wait, there's something wrong here. Have you noticed it yet? That's right. This version of Halo 3 is not in Chinese, but rather it's in Korean. Despite my console's region and language settings being Chinese, it's actually really bizarre to me. There were Chinese language versions of Halo 3 released, yet despite that, and the forced language and region settings on this Xbox, it downloaded the Korean version of Halo 3 when I inserted a US English copy of Halo 3. So, fun fact. Before games like MCC got multi-language support in the settings menu, if you wanted to play MCC in another language, you'd have to change your console's language and region settings and then re-download MCC. It would download the right game version based on your language and region settings. So it makes sense that would still be the case here, which is why I didn't download the English version of Halo 3 despite my disc being that version. But in this case, despite the region and language settings, it downloaded a copy of Halo 3 in an entirely different region and language. I have no idea why I did that. Maybe it's a mistake on Microsoft's part, or maybe it's an unofficial, unfinished feature that I wasn't meant to use, and it defaulted to South Korea. So with that in mind, what about OG Xbox games? Well, let's start by trying one of my favorites as far as backwards compatible games go. Conquer Live and Reloaded is recognized by the Xbox, and it does install and update just fine. Exact same process as the Xbox 360 games. But after the game is done installing, if I attempt to launch it, the OG Xbox boot animation does start playing as expected, but halfway through the animation, it just crashes. No matter how many times I try it, I cannot get Conquer Live and Reloaded to actually launch or get past the OG Xbox boot animation. I thought maybe it was just an issue with that particular game, so I tried two more OG Xbox games that are supposed to be officially supported. Both games installed fine off the disc, but neither could actually go in-game either. It seems OG Xbox games just simply cannot be played on a Chinese Xbox. I honestly have no idea why this might be the case, but most likely this feature is never meant to be officially supported, including with Xbox 360 games. So to sum this all up, this Chinese Xbox One is only somewhat backwards compatible with previous Xbox generations. However, only Xbox 360 games work, and they seem to be limited to the Korean language. OG Xbox games just don't work at all, beyond like half of the boot animation. That makes Chinese Xbox consoles the only Xbox One consoles across the board that cannot play OG Xbox games. Okay, so Xbox One and most backwards compatible games work, with some caveats here and there, some major caveats. Great mostly, but what about games that have been officially banned in China? One such game is Battlefield 4. It was officially banned in China back in 2013, even though it was never actually sold there officially either. Well, let's see if we can play banned games on this Chinese Xbox. So in my game library, as you saw, a lot of games show up, including most of my digital purchases and Game Pass games. It even shows upcoming games like Hellblade 2 for the Series X. But despite all that, Battlefield 4 does not show up in my list of games I can download, even though it's available on Game Pass and EA Play. So here I have a disc copy of Battlefield 4. Let's see if I can install it and play it. So it does seem to install just fine. It recognizes the disc and all. It even knows to download an update for the game. So now that it's finished installing, let's launch the game and see if it works. So right off the bat, everything seems to work fine. I can go all the way to the main menu just fine. But what's interesting here is that it isn't localized in a different language. It's all in English. Unlike most other games I've tried so far, which default to Chinese. I guess it kind of makes sense though, since Battlefield 4 was never even intended to be released in China, despite the ban. So that's probably why. But in any case, it seems that even games that are officially banned in China still work just fine on a Chinese Xbox. Now then, we've established that most games work well on Chinese Xbox consoles, if not technically better in the case of Xbox One games. But what about Xbox Live itself? It's free for life and isn't isolated from the rest of the world, but it does technically still exist in the beta state. So There's a weird story about the Xbox Live beta in China. It actually make my review of it a bit more complicated. According to some reports, when Xbox Live launched in China, it was originally region locked, barely had any games, and was kept separate from the rest of the world. So instead of making people pay for a stripped down version of Xbox Live, Microsoft made it free for all users. Apparently, Microsoft had announced that on March 17, 2016, the beta would be ending and users would have to start paying for Xbox Live. Roughly $60 a year back then. In exchange, the full Xbox Live would be available with all the usual features as well as integration into the global Xbox One community. But the day before the beta was supposed to end, Microsoft changed their mind and said the beta would continue on. They tried to make jokes about the situation, and Xbox fans in China ended up being furious about it. Also, the person that got me this Xbox says Xbox Live has always been open globally in China from the start, which is very odd, but it might explain why China MCC's matchmaking system works with like anyone. He also told me that the true reason why Xbox Live is free in China is because games with gold never existed with China either, as there was never enough games to give away, and therefore Xbox Live would have almost no value. The only thing Microsoft had to offer with Xbox Live was the online multiplayer, which by itself wasn't worth it. So there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and things appear to always be, changing too. So it's hard to say for sure. I'm not sure if or when Xbox Live's region restrictions changed, but I'm definitely able to access Xbox Live from this Xbox using my personal US-based account. So does it still work well? Well, as far as core features go, they're all there. I've had no trouble accessing my friends list, messages, and even party chats. Of course, the whole UI being in Chinese, at times I've had to use a translator app on my phone to figure out what's what. As for online games, again, I've had no trouble finding matches on games like Halo Infinite. However, it's really hard to accurately tell, how well Xbox Live works, because it's not like I'm actually playing on Xbox Live servers in China. Games like Halo Infinite use dedicated servers anyways, based on your physical location, so I'd be connected to US servers anyways. As for MCC, well, prior to when 343 started fixing MCC and adding dedicated servers, the game would be entirely peer-to-peer. So the China version of MCC is still the same. It's still peer-to-peer matchmaking, no dedicated servers. And without being physically in China, I can't accurately test out how well Xbox Live works, or if I can even connect to servers from other countries from within China. And truthfully, even though I had to go through all of China's verification systems to set this Xbox up, I'm not entirely sure which Xbox Live servers I'm connected to for even basic things like party chats. But as far as I can tell, with my experience so far, everything works just fine. It's just that information on this is quite difficult to find here, aside from, some old and probably outdated articles. So most I can figure out is just from my own personal experience. But seeing how other features on this console, like the store, are region locked, it's likely I am connected to the Chinese Xbox Live services. Alright, moving on, let's take a look at one of the other features of Xbox consoles, and that is apps. As I mentioned earlier, even the available apps on the store are quite limited, to the point where I couldn't even find a Blu-ray app or the Edge browser from the store. There's literally no web browser on this Xbox. However, I was still able to access some of my pre-existing apps from my library, including the Blu-ray app, but still no Edge app. Not all apps in my library are still accessible. And there's other apps like streaming apps like Netflix, Hulu, and browsers that you just can't download no matter what. As for what is on the App Store, there's a few basic apps from Microsoft and a few user-uploaded apps. Aside from that, there's also a few Chinese entertainment apps too. That's basically it for apps on the Chinese Xbox consoles. It's pretty much nothing for the most part, effectively. There's a few more interesting facts for this Xbox console too. For those interested, here is the version of the Xbox OS that's on it. It does appear to be a different build from normal Xbox consoles, which makes sense since it's been customized a bit for the Chinese market and government restrictions. There apparently used to be a method to convert these Xbox consoles into normal Xboxes. The hardware is all completely the same, and if you download Xbox recovery software onto a flash drive, you can actually change the OS to the one used by global Xbox consoles. However, this is a one-way process, and once you change the Xbox's operating system to the global version, you cannot change the global version back to the Chinese version. I don't know if this method still works anymore, and because it's a one-way conversion, I wouldn't want to try it either. If you're in China, it might be worth it to do this to get around all the restrictions, but for me, that would obviously defeat the purpose of me getting this console. Because if I switch it back to the global Xbox OS, then it is just a normal Xbox One X at that point. So, with all that in mind, you might still be wondering, what exactly makes this console so rare? Why is it so hard to buy online? Why do so few people sell it? Well, let's begin with the consumers of these consoles. The Chinese market. At launch, and even to now, these consoles are still quite restricted. While it seems Xbox Live has been opened up to the global network, while continuing to be free and allowing all games from all regions to be played, there's a lot of restrictions compared to the rest of the world. In fact, due to all these restrictions, a gray market sort of formed in China where Xbox consoles from Hong Kong or Macau would be imported into the mainland. Consoles from either of these places would be the global versions without any restrictions imposed by the Chinese government. It also cost about the same to get these imported consoles versus the official mainland China government approved consoles. It was also easy to get these, and you can find them at many retail stores or quick online order in China. Therefore, consumers in China really had little incentive to actually buy the official mainland version. That likely contributed to the slow sales of both Xbox and PlayStation consoles in the Chinese market. PC games were dominant in China, so that also probably resulted in fewer people buying consoles, and due to all the restrictions, even fewer people buying the mainland version. Therefore, to get one of these consoles, you basically have to get someone in China to go out of their way to buy one for you, since very few people probably already own one and want to sell it on eBay. Or you'd have to go to China yourself and buy it in person. But even if someone did want to sell it on eBay, or you buy it yourself in person, without activating the console and getting your account verified by the Chinese government, these things are essentially just paperweights and mostly useless. So there's very little reason for anyone to even try to sell these on the international market. That's pretty much what makes these consoles so rare. Very few actual owners of them, with almost no reason to sell them internationally to anyone. There's basically very little demand for these consoles overseas as well, because it's basically useless to most people. Plus, the cost of shipping such a large item overseas is definitely expensive too. The total cost of this Xbox One X plus shipping and everything else was around $500 for me. That's a brand new Series X now. It's not too bad, but compared to like an Xbox One X that you can get at GameStop, it's definitely a lot more expensive, since that was the launch price of the Xbox One X and now the Series X. Maybe dedicated achievement hunters might be interested in these consoles because it gives you access to all China exclusive games and therefore more gamer score, but it's still quite difficult to get one of these consoles unless you know someone, and even then it's more difficult to activate them. Now, other Xbox consoles, some of the other ones are rare because they were produced in limited quantities, like the Taco Bell Xbox One X. But the Chinese Xbox consoles are rare because they're obscure and unpopular, but still unique compared to the rest of the world. Physically, there's undoubtedly more Chinese Xbox consoles than there are Taco Bell Xboxes. But there's definitely more Taco Bell Xboxes in circulation globally than there are Chinese Xboxes. Alright, so that wraps it up for this video. This Xbox One X, or rather the family of Xbox consoles it belongs to, is indeed one of the rarest Xboxes in existence. Physically, it's the same as ordinary Xbox One consoles from the rest of the world. But it's so obscure that almost no one was remotely close when trying to guess what it was when I posted a picture of it on Twitter. In fact, it's so obscure that finding information on the history of Xbox in China is difficult enough too. Very few articles were ever written about it, and there seems to be a lot of conflicting information from all these sources, including some people that actually have the Xbox in China. But based on the latest info I've been able to get about this Xbox, it definitely is a decent offering in China now, especially with the ability to play games from the rest of the world, and the fact that Xbox Live is free for life there, and any account that signs into it. That being said, if you don't live in China, I don't recommend you try to get this Xbox unless you purely want it as a collectible. It would otherwise have very little use and functionality for you unless you know someone in China who would be able to help you out with the activation process. It's a cool piece of both video game and Xbox history though. It definitely has some very interesting and unique features as far as Xbox consoles go, and it's so obscure and rare that a lot of people either weren't even aware it existed or know what makes it unique at all. The free Xbox Live feature in particular was probably the most shocking for me when I learned about it. It makes me almost jealous, in fact, since people have been calling on Microsoft to make Xbox Live Gold free for years. And the closest Microsoft ever got to making Xbox Live free was for free-to-play games such as Halo Infinite multiplayer. But in China, or rather anyone with access to a Chinese Xbox, they have access to free Xbox Live Gold. Of course, PC gamers have had free Xbox Live for a while too. Back when Games for Windows Live launched, if you still remember that, if anyone remembers that at all, Xbox Live Gold was still a paid membership. But PC gamers clearly weren't going to pay for it, so Microsoft made it free on PC shortly after. In China, however, they made it free on a much larger scale for everyone on Xbox. Anyways, this is a pretty cool piece of Xbox history that I'm very excited to finally own a piece of. And hopefully I've answered all the questions you might have had about this very rare Xbox console. If there are any other questions you have about this console that you're curious about, let me know in the comments down below and I'll do my best to answer some of them when I get the chance. But aside from that, if you enjoyed this video and found it to be interesting, make sure to leave a like. And aside from that, feel free to discuss your thoughts about this Xbox console in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye guys!